Hello, everyone. We're just going to let all of our participants join, and then we'll get started in just a couple seconds here. All right. Welcome, everyone. Just so everyone knows, this program will be recorded and put on our YouTube channel for later. So if you missed any of it, or if you want to come back and watch more, please feel free to watch it later on our YouTube channel, as I'll put it on there by the end of today. Welcome to the Peoria Riverfront Museum Senior Morning Lecture Series, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Heather Placco, the Programs Manager, and I'm very excited to be hosting Dr. Ashley Holland, Curator with the Art Bridges Foundation, to speak about our newest exhibition, American Verses, on loan from Art Bridges. This Zoom presentation will be recorded and uploaded to the museum's account. Throughout the presentation, please feel free to ask questions, and our curator, Ashley, will gladly answer them that you might have. Feel free to leave those in the comments box or in the Q&A box, and I'll ask those questions for you as they come in. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Ashley Holland.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk about these really incredible works of art that are a part of the American Verses exhibition at the Peoria Riverfront Museum. And I've prepared a PowerPoint, so I'm thinking of this is sort of like a supersized gallery tour without a gallery. So we are going to take a journey together, and it should be a lot of fun, but feel free. As Heather said, if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask them, and we can just have a really great conversation. So let me begin. Okay, so this exhibition is called American Verses, Mark Bradford, Terry Atkins, and Carrie James Marshall. And it was done as a conversation that came out of a request from the curator at your institution, Bill Conger, who is really interested in presenting works by African-American males in the galleries and using the theme of sort of the novel as title within the works, and how the written verse can be translated into a visual form, and how we can use those concepts to create artwork and to have a larger conversation about contemporary African-American life, the experience of Black men, and just the overall American experience. And so I think this is a really fun exhibition. It's an important exhibition, and it's also sort of a surprising exhibition because it includes a bunch of different media. It's not just paintings on the wall. And in fact, you know, in some ways, none of it is paintings on the wall. It's collage, it's preparatory sketch, it's a sculpture that makes sound. And so it's really showing the breadth of what contemporary art can be, the different ways that artists find to express themselves and to talk about really complicated and also important issues. So just to take a step back to give you a little bit of information about the Art Bridges Foundation, which we have this really wonderful partnership with Peoria Riverfront. And what Art Bridges is we're a foundation that was created in 2017 to expand access to American art across the United States, and especially in areas that may lack access to large metropolis art museums, with the idea that all museums are important and that every museum, we believe, is there to serve their community and whatever that community might look like. And that by serving that community, you create moments of empathy and understanding and education and these really incredible places that can become community centers in a way, and not just, you know, places where art is held. And I think that this is such a wonderful example of the type of partnership that comes out of that mission. And so in talking with Bill, we looked at the Art Bridges collection, which I think people are always a little surprised because we are not a museum. Art Bridges Foundation is not a museum. We are a separate entity, even though we have a close relationship with Crystal Bridges Museum because we share a founder in Alice Walton. But we are actually an entity without museum space, but we have a collection of works that we lend out to institutions across the United States so that they can use that work to activate it within their own galleries. And so the works that we were looking at were works that really embodied this idea of the Black male artist, and also realizing that we had a couple of works that spoke to this idea of the novel, of American verse, of the written word. And I want to give 100% credit. This is totally, you know, Bill's creation in his exhibition, and it just happens to be using some works that come from my collection. And I think that he is on the webinar right now. So hi, Bill. Thank you so much for doing this incredible work at your institution. So let's look at some art. The American Verses presents the work of Mark Bradford, Terry Atkins, and Kerry James Marshall. And as you can see here, this is the entrance into the gallery, and the works that you see immediately are this incredible large-scale collage painting by Mark Bradford, as well as this sort of interesting looking piece by Terry Atkins. And we'll get a little bit more into the different works. But I want to also show, then you have the preparatory sketches by Kerry James Marshall. And so what you're really showing are three different artists from three different places in the United States that are talking about very unique aspects of their art creation through these works, and combining them into a space where not only are you experiencing them at the same time, the very small scale of the preparatory sketches with the huge scale of the Mark Bradford. I don't know if people realize just how big it is seeing it in an image. It's incredibly large. I think it's 18 feet across, which is just huge. And we can talk about, the process of getting that sort of work into a gallery. It doesn't come stretched already. You have to stretch it once it's in the space because of the sheer size of it. And then the work by Terry Atkins that resembles this very aesthetically gorgeous sort of golden sculpture on the floor, but it also makes sound. And so you're in this space, and it's not just going to sort of surround you with the works itself, but you're going to have this sound that gets added into it. And if you've experienced the work, you realize that it's not a melodic sort of shimmering of sound. It's quite a jarring sometimes sound. And I think that's always interesting for people, because the expectation of what you're going to hear and then what actually happens is very different sometimes. And I had someone once write a label for this work, and they described it as shimmering. I was like, it's a little bit more jarring than that. It's not quite shimmering, but it's really quite an experience. I think it's wonderful when we can take these works that maybe don't seem to have a whole lot in common as far as aesthetics go, and talk about them in a larger framework, which is really through this idea that these are all artists that are Black men that are creating work in a contemporary moment and are talking about very different things, but that are very personal to them. So let's take a closer look. The first artist is Mark Bradford. Mark Bradford, he was born in Los Angeles in 1961. And something that is really important to know about Bradford is that he grew up in his mom's beauty salon. He really, grew up spending time with her, watching the relationships that he saw between her and her clients, and also helping out within the salon and seeing the different processes that happen within that space. And he, even after high school, got his hairdresser's license and worked for a time at his mom's salon. So this was a really formative aspect of his childhood, that he was living in an environment that many may have thought was not, not as safe as suburbia might have been, but it was a place where he saw community and where he really felt at home. And so after he had worked at his mom's salon, he went and studied at the California Institute of Arts, and he became an abstract painter. And from the very beginning, he was really incorporating some of the materials he had found at his time within the salon into his works. And these materials specifically are the end papers that you use when you're doing a wave or a permanent. And it's this very sort of flimsy, almost transparent type of paper that is used to help hold the chemicals. And so he would embed that material into his collages and create these skin-like surfaces. And so this work, which I will pull up here, a closer image of it. This is Thexia, which is from 2016. And it's from a series of works that he did that appeared in the 57th Venus Biennale. And this was a part of the United States Pavilion. And the show that it was included in was called Tomorrow is Another Day. And throughout this show, he sort of incorporated these moments of literature and of pop culture. Tomorrow is Another Day obviously comes from Gone with the Wind. I think another part of it talked about Wizard of Oz. And then this specifically came from a gallery or a room that featured 3 works that were similar to this one that all reference sirens from Homer's Odyssey. So there was Thelxiopia, there was also, and forgive me if I don't pronounce them correctly, I'm not a Greek scholar, Leucotia and Renae, which were all sirens. And all of the works looked very similar to this, but on different scales. And then there was also a central sculpture called Medusa, as well as another work that was referred to as the Oracle. And so here you have an image of Medusa and one of the smaller works. And it was really this wonderful sort of space, similar to, in some ways, the space at Peoria Riverfront, where you're including different aesthetics into a larger concept. And this was really thinking about Greek mythology and incorporating the use of the end papers back into the canvas in a way that created almost a snake-like surface on it. And when you think about the larger project, the sirens were these beautiful women who lured the sailors onto their island so that they would crash and die. And they used their beauty as a way to trick them. And then Medusa had the head full of snakes, and that texture gets added into the painting. That's a really interesting thought about taking something that's unexpected, such as the idea of Homer's Odyssey, and creating it into a new form that is very engaging. And the works, if you can get close to them, unfortunately in this capacity, we can't get close to them. But the way that Bradford creates the canvas is that he would paint the canvas and then add the end papers onto it. And then over those end papers would rub violet and black pigments on top of it. And so it creates this really beautiful surface that is not as flat as images that are reproduced of it would make you think. It's very sort of three-dimensional in some ways. Any questions?
I don't see any questions so far, but can you tell me, does Mark Bradford talk about where his influence comes from in literature, where he finds interest, how he decides what literature to talk about or to make artwork in association with?
You know, I don't know the answer to that. I would imagine that it is sort of similar to how we all get inspired, that we're inspired by the world around us. And I think especially for this one, he was thinking about major works of literature and sort of these main moments that we all know about, sort of the Odyssey in theory. We've all seen Gone with the Wind. We know Wizard of Oz. These are major parts of literature that exist in the world that we have familiarity with. Even if we don't recognize maybe the subject matter, we understand what we're looking at in some context. So then our next artist is Terry Atkins. And Terry Atkins was born in Washington, D.C. in 1953. And he's really interesting because what Terry Atkins is known for is being a sculptor, but that's not how he started. He actually studied at Fisk University and Illinois State University in printmaking, and then realized as he finished his schooling that sculpture was really more of the aesthetic that he was looking for. And so he got his MFA from the University of Kentucky in sculpture. And he's somebody that is really important because he not only is a well-known, Black American sculptor, but he's also a teacher, and that's true for all of these artists, that they have influenced the next generation after them, which, none of them were elderly or older, but the generation that came after them is really just as important. And one example is that Atkins taught at the University of Pennsylvania, and he taught the artist Sanford Biggers. That's a very important artist that is using sort of cloth and the canvas in new ways, that takes it off of the stretcher and thinks about it in ways that are counter to the traditional way of presentations. And I think that speaks a lot to Atkins' work as well. And unfortunately, Terry passed away unexpectedly in 2014 from heart failure. And so this is a really fascinating work from his, because if you look at it, even though it was conceived in 2006, it wasn't fabricated until 2015, which means that it dated posthumously after Atkins had passed away. And the inspiration came from this tortoise shell that he had in his gallery. And he would have conversations with his gallerist and with his studio, and would say, I want to create this sculpture that's based off of this tortoise shell. And he drew up ideas about it. And really, when you think about Atkins' work, it's very, if you want to relate it to sort of art history canon, he's very Duchampian. He takes everyday objects. In his particular case, he takes everyday musical objects and he recreates them into new forms. And so he saw the tortoise shell. He knew he wanted to recreate that figure, but he thought about, how can I do that using a musical object that is maybe unexpected, that is not. And so he took these symbols that you see here, and these are symbols that he purchased at a music store. He removed the lettering that comes on top of them so that they were very just golden on the surface, and fashion them into a way that they resemble sort of the top of a tortoise shell. But that's not the only part of it, as I talked about. It's still very much a sound work. And Atkins has talked about how, to him, the process of sound is such an interesting aspect of art, that it's not just music. He's really thinking about sound as an actual sort of medium. And that's why it's always wonderful that this is not, it's not playing any sort of recognizable musical piece. It's really just thinking about what sound can do when you apply certain aspects to the tools that create the music. And so the way the work works, and you could see it a little bit in the entrance image, is that there is a structure underneath it that's called the brain. And it is a technical element that has programmed into it the music that is then played. And there are these small hammers underneath each cymbal that hit them at different intervals. And I think it's programmed to go maybe every 15 minutes. It's like between 12 and 15 minutes. And so during those times, it starts to shimmer and it starts to come to life. And then eventually it goes quiet again. And it really is that consideration of how can something that is visually beautiful also have a sound component added to it. And as far as the literary connection with it, it's connected to the novel by Richard Wright, which was written in 1940. And if you don't know this story, it tells a story about a young Black man living in poverty in Chicago's South Side during the 1930s. And it's really about how the entire system of America is set up for him to fail, and how he is constantly fighting against these aspects of life that are not meant to help a Black man within Chicago at that time. Of course, that story is not without controversy. James Baldwin talked about it in his notes on Native Son, about how he found it very sort of pessimistic, and that he didn't believe that that was inherently what all Black men were facing. But it's a larger conversation within this piece that is really talking about just the experience of a Black man in America and how that might look for somebody. And then it also relates to this really great story about the jazz player Charlie Parker at the beginning of his career. And he was performing with the sort of legendary drum Joe Jones. And I guess Charlie Parker just did not bring his A game that day. And so Jones, in what is considered sort of I can't think of the word, a practice within jazz, that when Parker really just did not perform well, Jones threw a cymbal at him. And when that happened, you know, that was such a jarring experience for Parker that it made him go home and it made him practice really, really hard so that he could become the best jazz saxophonist that there ever was. And so that inspiration that he got from this other musician through the cymbal speaks to, I think, the larger conversation about inherent ideas of somebody not being able to move beyond their position that is created by the world they live in, but also the idea of James Baldwin of thinking, you know, beyond that and thinking that there is some free will within that space. And there is always opportunity and places to move forward as well. Questions with Atkins in this work?
I don't have any specific questions yet, but I do really like the kind of a strange behind the scenes fun fact.
Yeah.
That when you're cleaning these, the substance that comes to clean these cymbals is called groove juice.
Yeah, it's awesome, the groove juice. And you have to clean every cymbal because they get fingerprints on them. They're hard to install. It's not a clean process to install them. It's an incredible work, and I love the idea that it was created from this idea that Atkins had and just was never able to realize. And really, there's always that question of when a work is created by an artist from an idea after the artist has passed, is it still their work? Yeah. And I think this is an example that this is 100% his work. It's exactly what he would have envisioned. If you see other works by him, it fits within his larger body of work really beautifully. And it's just an incredible piece, both visually, sound wise, and the stories behind it, because it has so many different facets.
Yeah, and I do think it's really interesting when you're in this space, you see it and you know that it's musical and you know it's an instrument, that these things when clashed together make a loud noise. You don't expect them to make a noise until they do. And the room is small that they're in, so it is kind of jarring. And I've watched people like physically jump back and be like, oh my gosh, that thing just made noise.
Yep.
But kids love it.
Yeah, oh good. I love works that have sort of multi-generational responses. And there is that surprising aspect of it, because unless you look at the label really closely, you don't realize that it's going to make noise. And it scared me many times. I know it's coming and it still frightens me, but that's the great piece about it. You know, it is a surprising work, and you think about what it corresponds to with the Parker and Jones story, that probably made a lot of noise too when you threw a symbol at him. And it's sort of a similar experience for you.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great piece. I love this one. This whole show is one of my favorites we've done.
Oh, good. So then our next artist, we're going to move a little bit outside of the Art Bridges collection and bring in some works that come from our friends over at Crystal Bridges. And this is really an example of Art Bridges' dedication to sharing works of art across the United States and believing that no work should sit in the vault if they don't have to, that art is created to be shared and museums are there to share all of their work. And so when we were talking about this show, there had been originally a work from the Art Bridges collection by, the name is Glenn Ligon, and it's called I Am Somebody, that is part of, it's talking about a speech that was given by a reverend, and it sort of uses words, actual physical words, as a way to talk about language and how when you say something over and over again, it starts to lose its meaning. But unfortunately, that work wasn't available for this show. And so I believe Bill asked me, well, what about the Art Town at Crystal Bridges, which I will show in a minute. Actually, I can pull it up here. And this is a really incredible work. It's a huge canvas that is physically attached to the wall. You can see the bolts that bolt it into the wall. And it is a centerpiece of the Crystal Bridges collection. So it does not travel very often. It also doesn't go off view very often. So in using this as our inspiration, the next best thing are the preparatory sketches that come from the work. And these really, I think, are a wonderful behind the scenes look into what inspires an artist and what their process is and how they create a final work of art and what goes into the thought process and the sheer just sort of production of it. And so I'm going a little forward, and I'll go backwards now, and thinking Kerry James Marshall is an incredibly important contemporary artist. He was born in Birmingham, Alabama in 1955, and he grew up in South Central Los Angeles. And what's really important with that is that he was right in the middle of the civil rights movement in both Alabama and Los Angeles. He was in places where the civil rights movement was happening very really and very publicly, and he was influenced by that, as well as being influenced that he grew up in a really stable and loving household and felt a very sort of deep sense of belonging and community within his home and within the communities that he grew up in. And so he really was also inspired by social realist painter Charles White, who would paint the world as it was around him. And all of these things led Marshall to create his work, which focuses on African-American life and history as subject matters. So when you think about a work by Kerry James Marshall, you think about images of African-American people as they are in the contemporary moment. And it's these really sort of thoughtful and beautiful and sometimes jarring depictions of people that he finds around them or around him and their stories told through the visual. And so this work, the Our Town, which these are, I believe you're doing it where you're switching them out you're doing 2 at a time and switching them out every couple of months. And this is an example of our loans for Peoria Riverfront are for a year, which for a work like the Bradford or for the Atkins is totally doable. It's not too long for them to be on view. Works on paper can't be on view that long. You have to be a little bit more careful with them. And so the Crystal Bridges collection has 6 of the preparatory sketches for our town. And so they're rotating them so that every time, if you go every couple of months, you might get to see new images, which is really fun. So it's a show that is there for a long time, but it's still changing. And our town, and I'll use the larger one for it just because you get to feel the entire impact of the work. But our town is obviously referencing the play by Thornton Wilder from 1938. And this play has sort of become the pinnacle of what is thought of American theater. It won the Pulitzer Prize for drama. It's really considered like this pinnacle piece of American literature that talks about the everyday lives of people during a time of the United States that was sort of peaceful, but also chaotic. It was, the 19 teens, I think it's 1901 to the 1918 of that time period. And it's thinking about everyday life as well as the moments of sadness, the moments of pain that happen within life. And I think that gets translated really beautifully over to Marshall's work, Our Town, which is talking about these paradoxes of existence for African-American families during the 1950s who were moving to low-income housing, these projects that were meant to sort of be idyllic environments, but were oftentimes the reality were that they weren't actually as idyllic as their names led them to be made to believe. It's part of a larger series called The Garden Project. And he's talking really about these different places, but how even though the environment may not be as idyllic as the name of the community is, that there was still a lot of happiness and love and family and community within those spaces. And so he's using the depictions as a way to show that sort of differentiation. And there are so many wonderful aspects in these works that tell you the different stories he's trying to convey through it. So if you look, you have like the sunbeams, which are talking about hope, and as well as the bluebirds. But then you also have the yellow bows, which are talking about how they have somebody who's gone away for the military, and they're hoping for them to return home. And then what's great with Kerry James Marshall is he's really also thinking about representation within his work, and how when he would go to art museums, he didn't see Black figures within those spaces. And so he wants to correct that missing part of art history and the American art canon and put back in Black figures, because just because they weren't depicted in museums did not mean that there were not Black people everywhere throughout the United States. And that is really then why he overemphasizes the Blackness of the skin, so that there is no question to the viewer about what he is saying and who he's talking about. And then I wanted to share, there's a VR component that comes with this, which I believe that you include in the gallery. And I don't know if it would be okay if I shared that here so that they could experience it and get the feel of going into the space.
Absolutely. Yeah, we do have a screen, and it's just to the right of the preparatory images.
Wonderful. So hopefully this will work. Let's see. I may have to unshare my screen and reshare it.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's what I'm gonna have to do. Share.
And I don't think we're getting any sound on our end, Ashley, but
No.
what I'll do is I'll make sure that we share the link in the description of this in the YouTube channel so people can see this as well.
Oh, good. Yeah, because it's really wonderful. It allows you to go into the picture and to see all of the different aspects of it, and to really have a moment with the work in a way that you can't just standing in a gallery. I will stop sharing then. It's not as much fun if you can't hear the audio.
But yes, that is a really neat feature to go along with the preparatory drawings. I think that's so cool.
Okay. So in thinking about this, like I was saying, it's a part of a larger series of works. I believe there were 5 that were done in the Garden Project series. And our town is the one that Crystal Bridges has. And then I thought I would share another example from the Denver Art Museum. And where our town, you may not automatically realize that what you're looking at is children that are living in the projects, and that this is the environment that is being talked about, that you're talking about a low income housing space. It's a little bit clearer, I think, in the Denver Art Museum's work, which is called Better Homes, Better Gardens, because you see the sign that you would see as you're going into that environment, and it says, "Welcome to Wentworth Gardens." And it's very much obvious that the name doesn't exactly correspond with the environment that you're looking at. It's not a garden space, it's housing, but you also see these really, this lovely couple that's very happy and loving, and obviously this is their home and their community. And so thinking about those paradoxes are really important, I think, in the work of Marshall, and looking at it from the larger topic of our town, which is very much a everyday life is not perfect. It's not idyllic, no matter what title you put on it. And so thinking about that in that capacity, I think creates a really nice endpoint for the American versus conversation, because America as itself is a paradox, and it is multiple things for multiple people. And looking through the lens of Black artists that are contemplating on those ideas is really an important thing to do, because it allows us to both understand others and understand ourselves. So I think that is the end of the PowerPoint.
Okay, well, do we have any questions that you'd like Ashley or myself to answer? Please feel free to go ahead and type those in the Q&A box or the comment box now. And I will ask Ashley, are you working on any new exhibitions with your foundation currently? What are you working on right now?
We are getting ready. Really up until this point, Art Bridges has worked with other institutions to put together in-house exhibitions, as well as traveling exhibitions, such as, I believe you had which show was it? It wasn't Walker Evans. It was the American Experience show, which was a Art Bridges sponsored traveling exhibition. And our goal coming forward is that Art Bridges is now going to start putting together exhibitions to travel, because we're at a point where our collection has gotten large enough that we have some really wonderful themes coming through. And I will recommend for anybody to go to the Art Bridges website if you have time and look at our collection and just see how varied it is, because we really are about what is meant by American art outside of just an art museum concept or definition, which if you go to some museums, the American Art Gallery means works done sort of pre-1900 and fall in that early American art concept. And then there's the modernist, and then there's the contemporary, and those are all separate. And we don't think of it in that way. We really just think about it as art that in some way shows what America is, what America could be, who lives here, and even the falseness of the concept of America. We don't live in America. We actually live in the United States. America is many different countries that span across borders. And a couple of 100 years back, those borders didn't even exist. Borders are creations. And so we're really always pushing the boundary of what can be meant with that. And I think it would be really incredible to create an exhibition that looks at, the idea of portraiture within our collection and within other collections, and how portraiture has changed over time, how it has become more inclusive over time. And it wasn't just something that was accessible to the wealthy elite of this country, but is now depicting a much more realistic view of everybody that lives in this country.
Wonderful. Well, I don't see any specific questions. Bill Conger wanted me to say, so great. Thank you, Ashley. We're excited for future projects with Art Bridges.
Thank you, Bill, for your incredible exhibition.
Yes, and we're so excited, and we really hope that everyone comes out to see the exhibition itself. You can find our open hours on the website. And thank you for attending Senior Morning today. A huge thank you to Dr. Ashley Holland for their presentation today. And be sure to tune in Wednesday, July 14th at 10:30 a.m. when we will be hosting our Curator of Science, Renae Kerrigan, to hear a special presentation about our exhibition T-Rex, the Ultimate Predator, on loan from the American Museum of Natural History. It starts on display on May 29th at the museum. And we look forward to seeing you soon here at the museum. This Senior Morning presentation is generously sponsored by Kim Blickenstaff. A special thanks also to museum members and Visionary Society members for their continued support in our virtual programming. Thank you everyone so much for attending, and have a great day.
Thank you.